pronounces woe on a couple of unrepentant cities, mainly Chorazin and Bethsaida, Capernaum, and all
Tyre and Sidon. He talks about these different cities, pronounces woe on them, tells people it'll be more tolerable for places like Tyre and Sidon on the last day than it will be for Chorazin and Bethsaida, because Chorazin and Bethsaida have received more truth, more knowledge. And so because they've received more truth and more knowledge, you're going to be held more accountable for that. He then talks about the return of the 72, and the 72 are celebrating because they did all these mighty things. Jesus tells them, don't rejoice that you did these things, but rejoice that you're in your Father's will. And then a lawyer decides to get after Jesus, okay, in the midst of the 72. Now, we're not sure whether this lawyer is part of the 72 or if this lawyer has approached him from beyond the 72. But either way, this lawyer is here, and he has a question for Jesus. So let's read. And behold, the lawyer stood up and put Jesus to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Now, he does call Jesus teacher, which is important to note. So he would have called him rabbi, which suggests he may have been one of the 72 disciples. But like I said, we can't say for certain. 26. Jesus said to him, what is written in the law, and how do you read it? And he, being the lawyer, answered. Now, it's interesting that we attribute the golden rule to Jesus. The golden rule actually comes from the lawyer. All right? So he says this, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said to him, you have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. So this was actually a common thing, a common saying amongst the people of that day. This was something that it was one of those, you call them mantras or mottos that very religious people would repeat. So this is not something that is just springing to life out of nothing. This guy knows his stuff. Do this and you will live. But desiring to justify himself, because Jesus kind of cuts the knees out from under him, so to speak. But desiring to justify himself, he said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Very Mr. Rogers, right? Won't you be my neighbor? Okay. Jesus replied to the man, and now we have the parable. All right. So we're going to be looking at these differing groups. Okay. This is going to be a little bit different than the groups that we've seen before. Who would you say right now, just based on what's going on in the story, who's in group one? So we have the lawyer. Okay, so we'll put the lawyer over here in group one. Okay. So we're just going to keep that in mind. All right. So we're going to see, really, there's group two, which we'll see in the story once we get there. And there's going to be group three. All right, let's read. Jesus replied, this is starting in verse 30, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him, and having beat him, departed, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by the other side. So who's our first person in group two?
Oh, no. The guy that got beat up.
So right now, we have a Samaritan who, or no, excuse me, we have the we'll call him the unfortunate. Okay. The victim. Yeah. So that's better. We have the victim. All right. Who do we have next in group 3? The priest. Okay. Now, here's an important question to ask. Why would the priest have crossed on the other side of the road? Do you know why?
Would be defiled because
Defiled why?
Because if he touched something was bloody,
Not bloody.
could not. Oh, not bloody. Almost dead.
If he was dead, he would have been defiled. He would have been unceremonially clean.
And he couldn't then serve
Right.
his job.
So he'd have to go back to the temple, get ritually pure again before he could go out. Okay. So there's your priest. All right. So let's take a look at some of the context here. So this guy's a lawyer. This really refers to a scribe. Pharisees and scribes, this tradition developed during the exilic period, Babylonian exile. And it supplanted the Levites as the interpreters of the written Old Testament and oral traditions, which would have been the Talmud. They could be Sadducees or Pharisees. Most in Jesus' day were Pharisees, and they became our rabbis today. So these lawyers, these scribes. Okay. So, who is my neighbor? This was a hot question in Judaism at the time, okay? This was a hotly debated topic, actually. Who is my neighbor? For Jews, who were their neighbors? Jews. Right? And so he's trying to trap Jesus in this hot topic debate. How many other people have tried to trap Jesus in like politically hot debates? I can think of the woman at the well, right? You Jews say you should worship in Jerusalem, but we worship here in Mount Hebron. Like, which one is right? Yeah. So it tries to distract Jesus with a hot button political issue, which is the trap. Okay, so if Jesus, they're always trying to trap Jesus into saying something he shouldn't. Okay, so a man, the implication is this guy's a fellow Jew. So this victim is a Jew. The priest is a Jew. Okay, so they should be, according to this guy, neighbors. Right? Okay. So, Jerusalem to Jericho. Okay. Notice it says he went down from Jerusalem. Jerusalem is up in the mountains. It is high elevation. Okay. It gets snow in Jerusalem. I know that's weird for us to think about like a desert place getting snow, but they get snow in Jerusalem. It's that high. So, Jerusalem for Jericho. Jerome would later call this particular highway the Bloody Highway. Because of all the violence which so often occurred. It was a 17-mile strip of land that goes from Jerusalem down to Jericho that is which descends nearly 3,000 feet. So 17 miles, you're going down 3,000 feet. That's a pretty steep descent. So the religious leaders, we've talked about the priest, and we're going to talk about Levite here pretty soon, were afraid of thieves, defilement, and involvement / time constraints. So let's keep reading. So the there we go. Parable of the Samaritan. Now by chance the priest was going down, passed by on the other side. 32. Likewise, a Levite. Who are the Levites? Well, the Levites are the people who serve in the temple. They are the ones who are making sure everything's in order. They work with the priests. So we'll put him in this group 3. Okay? Which also means they're Jews. Okay? Neighbor, neighbor, neighbor. According to this lawyer. All right? All right. So likewise the Levite, when he came to the place, saw him and passed by on the other side. And one of the other tellings of this particular one is because he was afraid of thieves. Okay, so we don't. It's interesting that these guys were not wanting to help. Okay, if you want to know about the defilement laws, look at Leviticus 21 or Numbers 19. Okay, those are where you're going to find those. So Levi came place and passed by on the other side. So these are two guys that should know better, right? All right. Now we get group 4. All right. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring oil and wine, and then set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave him to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back." Okay. So, who's in this group 4?
And the innkeeper?
Innkeeper's really not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He's kind of more of a passive character in this story. So the Samaritan. Is the Samaritan a Jew? Sort of.
Yeah. He's a sojourner.
Okay, so Samaritans are the result of which captivity? The Assyrian captivity. These were the people who were kind of dispersed into the nations. They're viewed as half-breeds. They're half Jewish. They kind of have the law, but they've also got this kind of Assyrian stuff going on in their theology. They're viewed as like worse than Gentiles, okay? So to hear about a Samaritan being good was like hearing about a pile of dung smelling like a rose, right? That's kind of that's the idea here. That's the racial divide that we have here. And so he's making a point. These people are viewed as like utterly irredeemable, defiled reprobates. Okay,
So they're half Jewish and half Assyrian?
they're mixed blood.
Oh,
Okay, so not necessarily half, but that's kind of they are Gentile and Jewish mixed together. Okay, so that's what makes them so yucky for the Jews. What Jesus is getting at here for the lawyer. So who's the victim is supposed to be the neighbor, right? Ideally, you're saying this guy is my neighbor. This guy is also my neighbor. Right? This guy is my enemy. Okay? There was a lot of what we would maybe call xenophobia between Jews and Samaritans. They did not like each other. In fact, you kind of see this in the story with the woman at the well. When the woman says, "Why do you, a Jew and a man, talk to me, a woman and a Samaritan?" Right? There's this, not only is there a gender divide, but there's this racial divide that kind of separates them. So for this lawyer, who would view himself either, probably in this camp, but this guy would be his neighbor. So for the lawyer, well, of course I'm going to stop to see if the Jew's okay. But wait, I might get beset by thieves, or I might end up ritually unclean. So maybe I won't. But this Samaritan has compassion on the victim. And now Jesus is using this story of the Samaritan to shame the lawyer. Okay, so see what the next question is here. 36. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And notice what the man says. He doesn't say the Samaritan. He says the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, "You go and do likewise." So, pretty easy little parable to figure out. right? Even the guy who, so this is one of those rare instances where the guy who is receiving the parable is the one who is who gets to understand it, right? It might not be easy for him to apply, but he understands it. There are many parables where Jesus says it's not for them to understand. It's for you to understand, but it is not for them to understand. This one clearly is one that is meant, this lawyer is meant to understand. It teaches the lesson that it's supposed to. Now, this lawyer might not necessarily apply the lesson that has just been taught, but we can't say he didn't understand the lesson. And he begrudgingly says that the Samaritan is the one who showed mercy, who showed compassion. He did not say the Samaritan, no. He couldn't bring himself to say that. So, but yeah, it's interesting that these two guys, whose duty it is to help people, declined to help. And I think that's the telling part of the story, is neighbor, and it's the enemy who's the one who helps. So there you go. It's a very quick and easy parable to understand. Hard one for this guy to apply, though. Because he wants to say only Jews are the neighbors. And only the Jews who are following the law, and therefore Jesus shouldn't be hanging out with sinners and tax collectors because they're not my neighbor. Right? So, anyway. Yeah. If you've learned any lesson here, it's don't travel the bloody way.
Hey, let's stay out that way.
I've actually been on that road. It's pretty cool. So any questions? Comments? Insights?
So who's our neighbor?
Jesus is everybody. Right?
People in need.
People in need. I always look at this and I spell it wrong. I don't. I know it's right, but then you look at it and it's like one of those words that's like, I would have typed it like 4 times and tried 3 different
spellings and like just went back to the first one because it didn't get the right underline. But yeah, be like the Good Samaritan.
Don't be like the lawyer and the priest and the Levite.
I didn't know he was a lawyer. It always says in the Bible something about the scholar.
Yeah, scholar, scribe, lawyer, they were the legal guys. Yeah. So they were the ones who helped the priests interpret the law. Yeah. Yeah. And write treatises on the law. They're the ones who preserve the oral tradition. And really, when we look at like when Jesus goes before the Sanhedrin, it's the lawyers, scribes, scholars that are the ones who are really trying to trap Jesus in a legal binding. But they can't get any 2 people to agree in their testimony, and it frustrates them because you need at least 2 witnesses to put somebody to death, and they couldn't get the 2 witnesses. They couldn't get anyone to agree. So,
In some sense, it sort of threw me off, like because I'm thinking of modern day lawyers.
yeah.
And not thinking interpreting the Old Testament.
Well,
law,
lawyers interpret what? Even today, lawyers help interpret law.
Yes,
So
back up and think that way.
yeah, so they helped interpret the law, i.e. the Torah, the Tanakh, right? Somebody asked me the other day, I keep saying Tanakh, what does Tanakh mean? So I'll give you okay, that's the way it's spelled. So Tanakh, when I say that, this is how the Jews refer to the Old Testament, okay? So Torah, okay, that's really easy. The Nevi'im and the Ketuvim. So Torah, Nevi'im is so the law, the writings, and the prophets. That's how they refer to it. So they abbreviate it as Tanakh. Yeah.
Kind of like a combination.
Yeah, really. Yeah. So, and then, of course, you've got some vowel changes in there, and then you've got the that sound there. But yeah, so Torah, Nevi'im, Ketzavim. That's how they say the Old Testament, and I kind of I like that a little better. But the law of the writings and the prophets. So when Jesus is referencing those, he says the law of the writings and the prophets. He's Tanakh. Is probably what he's actually saying, which is kind of cool. We just have to expand that out because we don't necessarily know that that's what that means.
And it
But yeah.
could be just probably
So they
the scribes and the apostles that could write.
So-
Right?
well,
Read and write.
some of them. So Matthew for sure, John and James for sure, Peter probably. Some of the others maybe not so much because we don't really have writings from them. So it doesn't that not yeah.
Paul's writing and Peter's writing are very distinct.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
can tell that it's definitely written by a different
Yeah.
fellow.
So the lawyers would interpret the Tanakh, but they'd also interpret the Talmud. Okay, which is another. It's kind of like the oral tradition. So they would take the oral tradition, which was usually the commentary on the Tanakh, and they would read the Tanakh. They would look at the Talmud, and then they would make a judgment, or help make a judgment. So that's kind of what the lawyers